من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, فإن شاء Allah, we'll continue with reading from the book known as Sharh Usul اعتقاد أهل السنة والجماعة, the explanation of the fundamentals of the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And just to remind everyone, when we talk about this book being the explanation of the fundamentals of the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, then it is an explanation to the fundamentals, the basics, the principles that everything else is based off of. So what are those principles? The Quran, the Sunnah, the Sahaba, the consensus of the Ummah, the way of the Salaf, holding fast upon it until death, and avoiding innovation in its people. So this book is an explanation to these principles, explanation of the Muslims' belief as it relates to the Quran and as it relates to the Sunnah. What is the belief of the action of Ahl Sunnah, the people of the Sunnah, the people of the correct Aqidah, wal Jama'ah, and their group. And the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he's still in the chapter, the reward of those who preserve the Sunnah and revive the Sunnah and call to the Sunnah. And the last narration we read was how from the benefits of the people, or from the benefits of those people who preserve, revive, and call to the Sunnah, is that Allah Azza wa Jal makes the love of them a sign of Iman. And so we mentioned the statement of Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, where he said that if you see a person from Basra loving Hammad ibn Zayd, then that person is upon the Sunnah. And so from the rewards of a person who preserves the Sunnah and calls to the Sunnah and revives the Sunnah is that Allah makes the love of that person a sign of Iman and a sign of being upon correctness. And like this is the Sunnah of Allah Azza wa Jal throughout the generations. When you see somebody loving the Ansar, فَحُبُّ الْأَنصَارِ ayatul Iman. Likewise, when you see somebody loving Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman, when you see somebody loving Ibn Taymiyyah or Imam Ahmed, for example, when you see somebody loving Ibn Taymiyyah, when you see somebody throughout the years, throughout the generations, there are people who Allah Azza wa Jal makes loving them a sign of Iman. And that love is because of what they do from preserving the Sunnah, reviving the Sunnah, and calling to the Sunnah. Now, we'll continue on. The author, he says, أخبرنا علي بن محمد بن عمر قال أنبأنا عبد الرحمن ابن أبي حاتم قال حدثنا صالح بن أحمد بن حنبل قال حدثني علي بن المديني قال سمعت عبد الرحمن بن مهدي يقول لم أرى أحدا قط أعلم بالسنة ولا بالحديث الذي يدخل في السنة من حماد بن زيد. Al-Lalakai, he says that Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Umar informed us. He said that Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Hatim, right? This isnad is a beautiful isnad. Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Hatim, Imam. He said that Salih ibn Ahmed ibn Hanbal, Salih ibn Ahmed ibn Hanbal, the older son of Imam Ahmed, Imam. He said that Ali ibn al-Madini narrated to me. Ali ibn al-Madini, the scholar, the contemporary of Imam Ahmed, the Sheikh of Bukhari. Ali ibn al-Madini, he said, I heard Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi. I heard Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, the Imam. He said, I've never seen anybody more knowledgeable about the Sunnah, nor about the hadith that should be included in the Sunnah than Hammad ibn Zayd. Hammad ibn Zayd. Like when we look at this narration, a person might say, but I thought the Sunnah and I thought the hadith were synonyms. And here we have to understand that from the meanings of the word Sunnah, there are different meanings of this word. And so when he says, I've never seen anybody ever more knowledgeable about the Sunnah, He's not talking about the Sunnah as it relates to the statements of the prophets, the actions of the prophets, and the allowances of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the definition of a hadith. That is not what he means when he says somebody more knowledgeable about the Sunnah, because there were people more knowledgeable about the hadith of the Prophet than Hammad ibn Zayd. Even though Hammad ibn Zayd was an imam, he doesn't mean Sunnah in that regard. What he means when he says Sunnah in this regard, he's talking about the fundamentals of the religion. Sunnah as opposed to bid'ah. And if we remember, we said that the term Sunnah has different meanings for different disciplines. So the word Sunnah in hadith means hadith. And the word Sunnah in fiqh means mustahab, or a non-binding command, a preferable action. The word Sunnah as it relates to usul talks about usul al-fiqh, talks about hadith as an aspect of it being a proof, not just it being attributed to the Prophet. But the word Sunnah as it relates to usul ad-din, aqaid, aqidah, minhaj, then the word Sunnah in this context means the Islam that was the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in belief and in action, but specifically in belief, in aqidah. And so he's saying, Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, who was from the Imams of Jarh wa Ta'dil, and the people who were very known for it, the schoolmate or the classmate of Shu'bah, I'm sorry, not Shu'bah, Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, from the students of Shu'bah, rahimahumullahu jami'ah. And so Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, he knows what he's talking about when he talks about people. He's saying, I've never seen anybody ever more knowledgeable about the Sunnah, i.e. about the correct aqidah, nor about the hadith that should be mentioned when talking about the Sunnah, right? What hadith should be included in the conversation of aqidah? Right? When we talk about the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of them are about ahkam, salat, zakat, sawm, hajj. Some of them about mu'amalat, interactions, how to do business, marry, divorce. Some of them are about history, things that happen in events in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But some of the narrations that are attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these narrations deal with aqidah. So who was the most knowledgeable about the narrations that dealt with aqidah? This is Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi saying, I've never seen anybody ever more knowledgeable about the Sunnah, i.e. the correct aqidah, nor more knowledgeable about the ahadith that are explaining or dealing with the correct aqidah than Hammad ibn Zayd. Hammad ibn Zayd, rahimahullah ta'ala. And as we mentioned, this narration, it might not have a direct connection to the chapter title. The chapter title is, what is the reward? Right? One might say, and it's a stretch, the reward is that the people of Jarh and Ta'dil, the people of the Shuhada of Allah, if you will, right? The people who confirm the validity and the righteousness of an individual will acknowledge your validity and appreciate you when you preserve the Sunnah, revive the Sunnah, and call to the Sunnah. This could be the connection, even though there is a stretch in doing so in this way, right? But it is the truth, right? I'malu wa sayarallahu amalak, right? Act and Allah will see your action, as well as the messenger, as well as the believers. So the point is that perhaps the connection is in the fact that when you preserve the Sunnah and revive the Sunnah and call to the Sunnah, the people whom Allah Azza wa Jal has made them his witnesses on earth. Antum shuhada Allah. As the Prophet ﷺ said to the Sahaba, you are the witnesses of Allah, right? When they testify about a person, the Prophet ﷺ said about that person who they spoke good about when he died and they saw his janazah, wajabat. What you said has to be the case. And when they saw the person who they spoke bad of when his janazah passed by, he said, wajabat. What you said has to be the case because you are the witnesses of Allah on this earth. And so maybe the reward for the person who preserves, revives, and calls to the Sunnah is that the witnesses of Allah on this earth will acknowledge them with good. And that is a prelude or a precursor to the good that Allah has in store for them in the hereafter. If those whom Allah set up as the witnesses testify to your goodness, then this is a good sign of the goodness for you in the hereafter. So this could be the connection. But what is more likely the case when we say what's the purpose of the author bringing this narration in this chapter, when the chapter topic is the reward, and there's no mention of any reward, it's just telling us about the quality of Hamad ibn Zayd, we say that perhaps the reason the author mentioned it is to set us up to appreciate the upcoming statements of Hamad ibn Zayd regarding the Aqidah. And so Hamad ibn Zayd is going to have statements, and perhaps the author is setting us up to correctly value and appreciate his statements by reminding us who he is. And as we said, the chapter before this one, the author explicitly just mentioned by name who the people were. And so it's as if in this chapter, he's also including, besides the reward, giving us some details about the quality of some of these individuals. Perhaps one of these two reasons is the reason why this narration was presented in this chapter. Naam, he says, وأخبرنا عبد الواحد بن محمد الفارسي قال حدثنا محمد بن مخلد قال حدثنا صالح بن أحمد قال حدثني علي بن المديني قال سمعت عبد الرحمن بن عون وأخبرنا أحمد بن عبيد قال أنبأنا محمد بن الحسين قال حدثنا أحمد بن الزهير قال حدثنا علي بن المديني قال سمعت عبد الرحمن بن مهدي يقول ابن عون يقول ابن عون في البصريين إذا رأيت الرجل يحبه فاطمئن إليه، وفي الكوفيين مالك بن مغول وزائدة بن قدامة إذا رأيت كوفيا يحبه فرج خيره، ومن أهل الشام الأوزاعي وأبو إسحاق الفزاري، ومن أهل الحجاز مالك بن أنس. So here, after mentioning the statement about Hamad ibn Zayd and how he was from the people of Ahl al-Basra, the sign that a person was on the Sunnah. If a person loved Hamad ibn Zayd, then this was a sign that a person was on the Sunnah. And the reason why this was a sign was because of his knowledge of the correct Aqidah and his understanding of it and his clarification of it and calling to it. The author brings some narrations talking about other individuals. And so he says that Abdul Wahid ibn Muhammad al-Farisi informed us. He said that Muhammad ibn Makhlad narrated to us. He said that Salih ibn Ahmed narrated to us. He said that Ali ibn al-Madini narrated to me. He said, I heard Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, And as we mentioned, when an individual in the hadith says then this is a transition from one isnad to another, where the origin or the beginning of the chain varies from the one isnad to the another, while the end of the chain matches. So this chain ended with Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, and then he says at another chain transitioning, Ahmed ibn Ubaid informed us. He said that Muhammad ibn Hussein informed us. He said that Ahmed ibn Zuhair narrated to us. He said that Ali ibn al-Madini narrated to us. And so now the chains come back together. He says, I heard Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi saying, Ibn Aun, with regards to the people of Basra, if you see a person loving him, then you can relax with them. فَطْمَئِنَّ إِلَيْهِ. Then you can feel comfortable around them. And this reminds me of what we talked about earlier when we talked about Ahl al-Sunnati wal-Jama'ah, how this thing of ours is like a large extended family, and how you might not know your family because of the different generations and how large you've become. But at the time when it's time to get together in the reunion, you can recognize your relatives by who they relate to. You know, all the Joneses come together in this individual, and all the Smiths come together in this individual. And you know that the Joneses and the Smiths shared a father, a grandfather somewhere further back. And so by knowing this, you're able to keep your relationships clear and obvious. Like this is the affair of the Sunnah. And that's why we're called the family of the Sunnah and its group. So we can know our relatives and who we should feel comfortable with and who we can relax around by who they are related to, who they are attributing themselves to, who did they descend and come from. And it doesn't mean a blood dissension or a blood relationship, but who they descend from in knowledge. And so like this, the author is mentioning this narration of Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, who said, Ibn Aoun, and Abdullah ibn Aoun, as it relates to the people of Basra, if you see somebody loving him, then you can relax around them. You can be comfortable with them. That's your family. Those are your people. If you see somebody loving Abdullah ibn Aoun, then those are your people. You can relax around them. He says, and as it relates to the people of Kufa, if you want to know who are your people, who are your family, who are your friends from the people of Kufa, he says, then it is Malik ibn Mighwal and Za'idah ibn Qudama. Right? These are the people of Kufa that if somebody knows Malik ibn Mighwal, you go, oh yeah, those are my guys. Yeah, mashallah. We're related. We're close. You know Malik ibn Mighwal? Yeah, I'm with Ibn Aoun. They're family members. They both study from the same teacher, from the Tabi'een, from the Sahaba. He says, and if you see a person in Kufa loving these two people, i.e. Malik ibn Mighwal and Za'idah ibn Qudama, then you can hope for their goodness. You can hope that they're on some goodness. When you meet somebody like this from the people of Kufa who has good things to say about these people, then you can hope that they're on some type of goodness. And as it relates to the people of Asham, the people of the Levant, right? The Jordan, Palestine, Syria, right? This area, Lebanon. As it relates to the people of Asham, then Al-Awza'i, what is it? Amr ibn Abdurrahman Al-Awza'i and Abu Ishaq Al-Fazari. Right? These are the people who you can know that if somebody is attributing themselves and descending from these individuals in knowledge, then you can know that they're on goodness. And as far as the people of the Hijaz, and the Hijaz, as we know, is the area Mecca, Medina, Ta'if, Jeddah, like this area is known as Hijaz, Central Arabia. He says, then Malik ibn Anas, right? These are the people who they would judge a person by their view and their relationship to these people in the different areas. And this narration gives us some benefits. And it gives us some benefits that some people go to too much of an extreme about, while others don't give it the value that it deserves. So they're too negligent regarding it. And that is the issue of cooperation. And that is the issue of checking in. And that is the issue of relationships between the students and the mashayikh of various locations, right? The Salaf used to look at a person from a particular area based on their relationship with others in that particular area. So when we hear some of our brothers sometimes saying things like, it don't matter what so-and-so think about me, I don't care what the brother says, the brother ain't nobody, it's not important, right? They're not in charge. That we don't want to go to the extreme in saying that a person's actions needs to be done for someone else, or that a person needs to make their main priority being accepted by others. But you know a person by his friends, by his companions, by his relationships. And so if a person is from the city where there are obvious people of goodness in that city, people upon the da'wah, people upon the sunnah, people who are known for supporting it and calling to it and reviving it. And then there's a person in that city who is disgruntled with them, opposed to them, without any validation or without any just cause, then this is something to be concerned about. And so when we see some of our brothers using this as a principle, then this principle isn't foreign to the way of the Sunnah. It's not foreign to the methodology of the Salaf. The Salaf absolutely looked at other people based on their relationships. So if you go to Medina and you don't visit the Mashayikh of Medina, that would be a criticism. Why aren't you going to visit the Mashayikh of Medina? If you go to Kuwait and you don't visit the Mashayikh of Kuwait, if you go to Mecca, if you go to Jeddah, if you go to these different areas and you're not visiting the people of prominence and benefit in Salafiyah and Hadith in these areas, quote unquote, checking in, then this is something that's concerning, right? Because these are the people who are known in those areas. While at the same point in time, we don't make somebody's religion contingent upon their relationship with a person, right? That is something that we used to see in the Nation of Islam, where if a person acted bad, they would kick them out of Islam for a period, right? They would say you can't practice Islam for a certain amount of time. No, a person's Islam is not contingent upon their relationships. And the individual works for Allah and to make Allah happy. And if a person is making Allah happy, فَلَا يَخَافُ فِي اللَّهِ لَوْمَةَ اللَّائِمِ, then he doesn't need to fear, for the sake of Allah, the criticism of any criticizer. So if somebody is criticizing him or threatening him by, I'm going to turn the Mashayikh against you, or I'm going to tell Sheikh so-and-so on you, while that individual who is being threatened is only worshiping Allah correctly and only doing what they believe to be the haqq based upon knowledge and based upon evidence, then he has nothing to fear because he's worshiping Allah to the best of his ability. But there's a middle ground in between both of these scenarios, right? We look at a person, if a person doesn't like Ibn Taymiyyah or speaks ill of Ibn Taymiyyah or speaks ill of the scholars or speaks ill of the Salafis or has only bad things to say about his brothers, then yes, this is something that causes concern. Every time you hear their conversations, it's, man, these brothers do this, these brothers do that, man, I can't stand these brothers, right? Instead of trying to bury the faults and bring rectification, and instead of loving the people in different areas who are establishing some type of goodness, even if there's deficiencies, then this is something to be concerned about. While at the same point in time, the people who make it seem like if you're not with us, then you're against us, and we're the only Salafis, al-Aqha, al-Khullas, and things like this, then no, that's an extreme action, right? We don't make somebody's religion contingent upon, did they check in with so-and-so? Did they get an approval from this particular individual? Or do they have permission to do this or that from this particular individual? And so there's a balance there. And so this is an example of that balance. We would judge people and know what kind of person they were based on the kind of company that they kept and based on who they descend from in their knowledge. And this is the statement of Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, who, as we said, was from the leaders of imams, or the leaders of the people of criticism and praise during his time, right? From the Imma in this regard. And so this is something that was part of the nature, right? If you go to a person and he doesn't like Imam Ahmed, he only has bad and subversive and backhanded compliments and criticism of Imam Ahmed, you're going to look at that person a certain way. If they have little remarks all the time to make about Sheikh bin Baz, for example, of the modern scholars, every time they talk about him, they say, yeah, he's a good guy, but you know, bin Baz, he wasn't. These type of things, you're going to feel a way about them. And you should, because these people, and Allah knows best, are the people that Allah made loving them a sign of Iman in their time. And so that's what this statement is referring to, and Allah knows best. Now, he says, أخبرنا أحمد بن عبيد قال أنبأنا محمد بن الحسين قال أنبأنا أحمد بن زهير قال حدثنا محمد بن عباد بن موسى قال حدثنا العكلي قال كان عمار بن رزيق وسليمان بن قرم الضبي وجعفر بن زياد الأحمر وسفيان الثوري أربعتهم يطلبون الحديث وكانوا يتشيعون فخرج سفيان إلى بصرة فلقي أيوب وابن عون فترك التشيع. سبحان الله. سبحان الله. I mean, there's so many lessons. If we really sat and like went over these lessons, each of these is a dose. Here he's going to mention a narration that all of us can benefit from. And it is the tawbah when it is sincere. Shouldn't be held against a brother. And the things that a person did when they didn't know better shouldn't be held against them. Right? We should be tolerant because our goal is to rectify the people and to bring the people to the haqq, not to ostracize them and isolate them and kick them out. We should be the most welcoming to the people because it leads to us gaining them and capturing their hearts and including them in the goodness. And this is an example, because if we treated everybody with that harshness, that repulsion, that aversion, when we see them upon some type of mistake, then we would miss out from the good that Allah might have for them in the future, for them by guiding them in what they can bring to the ummah, and for us by being the purpose of their guidance or the cause of their guidance. And this is something that only the a'imma, this is something that only the people of knowledge and intellect and wisdom will recognize and thus employ and take benefit of. So what is this narration that says all of that? He says that Ahmed ibn Ubaid informed us. He said that Muhammad ibn Hussein informed us. He said that Ahmed ibn Zuhair informed us. He said that Muhammad ibn Abbad ibn Musa narrated to us. He said that Al-Uqli narrated to us. He said that Ammar ibn Ruzayq, as well as Sulaiman ibn Qaram al-Dabbi, as well as Ja'far ibn Ziyad al-Ahmar, and, pay attention, Sufyan al-Thawri. All four of them used to learn hadith. And they all used to be Shia. They used to learn hadith, but they had this tashayyu' with them. Remember, these are from the people of Kufa. Kufa was from those areas where tashayyu' was prominent, right? And the early tashayyu' might not be as bad as one is thinking nowadays when you think about the Rafidah, but it was still something that was outside of the da'ira of the Sunnah, right? There was Sunni and Shi'i. And these four individuals, and from them was Sufyan al-Thawri. They had with them this tashayyu', right? And that's not strange. There was a lot of imams that had this error at some point in time early on, especially the people from these areas where tashayyu' was prominent. Sufyan al-Thawri early on, Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani, right? But the point that is being made here is that all four of them, they used to learn hadith. They used to seek hadith. So even the early Shia, they were still upon the Sunnah. They just had these errors in small aspects of tashayyu'. So they would learn hadith, but even then they were on this area, or they had these aspects of tashayyu'. He says, and then Sufyan went to Basra. So Sufyan al-Thawri is from Kufa. All four of these individuals are studying hadith. Sufyan al-Thawri traveled to Basra to go learn hadith. And while in Basra, he met Ayyub. He met Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani. And he met Ibn Aoun, yani Abdullah ibn Aoun. And remember, these were from the Sighar al-Tabi'een that we said were going to be the replacements of Muhammad ibn Sirin. Those who bridged the gap for Muhammad ibn Sirin. So these are imams. And then the narrator says, Al-Uqli, he says, and thus when he met these individuals, he abandoned tashayyu'. He abandoned Shiism. And so just look at the benefit of the one who preserves the Sunnah, like Ayyub, like Ibn Aoun, the one who revives the Sunnah, the one who calls to the Sunnah, how they yani received and captured and captivated the heart of this individual, Sufyan al-Thawri, encouraging him by their teaching and their action and their way to leave Tashayyur. And we know that Sufyan al-Thawri became one who was known as Amir al-Mu'mineen in Hadith, the leader of the believers in Hadith, and from the Imams of Aqidah. From the things we're going to see in this book is the Aqidah of Sufyan al-Thawri. And who gets the reward of Sufyan al-Thawri in this regard? The ones who preserved the Sunnah before him, the ones who revived it and called him to it, like Ayyub and like Ibn Aoun. And so this is the reward. You never know what imam might be the product of something you say. And we ask Allah for his fadl. We ask Allah for his bounty. But this is why it's so important to be diligent upon the Sunnah, preserving it, calling it, reviving it in the people. You go in a masjid and pray. Establish the Sunnah. You never know what young child might be watching you, who that young child might grow up to be an imam, or what old person might be watching you, who that person might have an influence on somebody. And thus, like this, that hasanat, that reward is continuing for you after your death because of how you preserved the Sunnah first, revived it with your actions, and called the others to it. And this is especially the case with Aqidah. Right? The people of innovation, they weren't able to propagate their Aqidah amongst us until we started to be quiet. And so all of the Muslims that you meet who their default answer is Allah is everywhere, wa'iyadhu billah, it's because nobody has really taken the time to explain to them the falsity of this statement. So if you take the time to explain to them the falsity of this statement, not out of hatred and disrespect and belittlement and criticism, but to say, Akhi, it doesn't make sense, right? Consider that Allah said he's above his throne in the Quran. That's the foundation. And also consider the fact that if you say Allah is everywhere, then he's in the toilet, wa'iyadhu billah. And they will say, oh, subhanAllah, no, I don't mean it like that. Yalla, ya akhi, don't say it like that. Say what Allah said, you'll be safe, right? And all of us know that Allah is above his arsh, right? Yeah, well, I know that, but I mean, like, he sees everything, he hears everything. Yeah, akhi, that's what it means. So don't say he's everywhere, just say he sees everything and he hears everything, like he said. Inni ma'akuma asma'u wa ara. I'm with the two of you, I see and I hear, like he said, or I hear and I see, like he said to Musa and Harun. And like this, you'll capture that person's heart. And when you capture that person's heart, you never know what that person might do later, all of which would fall into the mizan of your hasanat. But only a person with lub, with intelligence, with wisdom, with the strong foundation of the Sunnah will be one who will implement this type of teaching. As far as the youth, as far as the people who are impetuous, then when they see a person, their first thing is cut their eyes, ghetto smile, frown, right? Where are you from? Watching you as you walk up and down the masjid, instead of extending a hand, welcoming you to their home, inviting you over for a meal, getting an idea of how you are. And if they see an error, trying to fix the error. Because often the people who are in error are not deviant. They're just in error. There's a difference between a deviant, a person who has adopted this methodology and calls to it, or even if they don't call to it, accept it and use it as their foundation, and between those who are just in error. They were raised in an environment that promoted such things and never took it upon themselves to learn the details. Sufyan al-Thawri used to be on Tashayyur, and he ended up where he ended up due to the efforts of people like Ayyub and Ibn Aoun. And so that's a lesson for us. Now he says, أخبرنا علي بن محمد بن عمر قال أنبأنا عبد الرحمن بن أبي حاتم قال حدثنا محمد بن مسلم قال سمعت أبا زياد يقول سمعت عبد الرحمن بن مهدي يقول الناس على وجوه فمنهم من هو إمام في السنة إمام في الحديث ومنهم من هو إمام في الحديث وأما من هو إمام في السنة وإمام في الحديث فسفيان الثوري. Right, this is a narration that clarifies something that we mentioned earlier, and it also connects to these previous narrations. He says that Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Umar informed us. He said that Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Hatim informed us. He said that Muhammad ibn Muslim narrated to us. He said that I heard Aba Ziyad, who said, I heard Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi. Once again, this person, he's the pinnacle of knowledge about people. So you can relax and trust his statement when he talks about the value and the quality of a person. Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, he said, the people are of different types or at different levels, wujuh, different aspects, different classifications. The people are of different classifications. So from them are those who is an imam in the Sunnah as well as an imam in hadith. Like what we mentioned before, there's a difference when they talk about Sunnah and hadith. Hadith is what we all know it to be, the statements, the actions, the allowances, the description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when they talk about Sunnah, they're talking about this aqidah and this minhaj. And so he says, from the people are those who are imams in the Sunnah as well as imams in hadith, meaning they are the leaders and the pinnacles in this field, in both fields. And from them are those who are imams in hadith, yani they are leaders and pinnacles in the field of hadith, while they might not have reached such a status in affairs of aqidah and Sunnah. And it doesn't mean they're deviant or incorrect. It just means that they haven't reached the level of leadership and authority in that field. So there are people who are imams in Sunnah and hadith, and there are people who are imams in hadith only. He says, as far as from the people who are imams in the Sunnah and imams in hadith, then Sufyan al-Thawri. So this is Sufyan al-Thawri starting off in Tashayyur, meeting the likes of Ayyub and Ibn Awn, and then becoming an imam in both of these fields. And that reward goes back to the likes of Ayyub and Ibn Awn. He says, أخبرنا علي بن محمد بن عمر قال أنبأنا عبد الرحمن بن أبي حاتم قال حدثني أبي قال حدثنا عبد الرحمن بن عمر الأصبهاني قال سمعت عبد الرحمن بن مهدي يقول أئمة الناس في زماننا أربعة سفيان الثوري بالكوفة ومالك بالحجاز والأوزاعي بالشام وحماد بن زيد بالبصرة. He says that Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Umar informed us. He said that Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Hatim informed us. He said that my father narrated to me, his father Abu Hatim al-Razi. He said that Abdul Rahman ibn Umar al-Asbahani narrated to us. He said, I heard Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, who said, the imams of our time, the imams in our generation, i.e. his generation, are four. There are four imams in my generation. And this is something that used to happen all the time, right? During the Sahaba, during the Tabi'een, during the middle Tabi'een, the younger Tabi'een, the Atba'at Tabi'een, right? The scholars of every generation, you would find that scholarship from the people would be those who would stand out amongst everybody else. And very often those people who stood out amongst everybody else, they stood out because of affairs of Sunnah, Aqidah, and Minhaj. Even in our day and age, when you talk about the likes of Sheikh bin Baz, Sheikh Uthaymeen, Sheikh Al-Albani, rahimahumullah, and Sheikh Muqbil, rahimahumullah, how these individuals who are of different levels and different statuses in knowledge, different expertise, right? And who is comparable to what in what way, and who is lesser than or more than another in a different way. But one thing that made them stand out above all others wasn't because they were all scholars of hadith. It wasn't because they were all scholars of fiqh. It wasn't because they were all pillars and, those in charge of large bodies of Muslims. What led them and made them stand out is how they were in affairs of Aqidah and Minhaj. So when you look at these names, and some people, you might hear them sometimes, excluding Sheikh Muqbil from this group or trying to lessen his status. But he is deserving of being in this group not just for the knowledge that he possessed, but also because of what we see from the efforts of him in establishing the Sunnah. That's what these individuals stood out for. That's what made them the four Imams of our time. It's not that they were all Shaykh al-Islam, but it's how they were in establishing the Sunnah and the Aqidah amongst their people. Nahika bin Baz. You don't even have to ask a question about bin Baz. It goes without saying. This is Uthaymeen. You can't find him in any dars except that he finds a way to slip Aqidah into it. You could be learning the huruf al-hijab, the grammar, the Arabic grammar, and how many jewels of Aqidah and Minhaj does he slip into a dars that you would think have nothing to do with it. But he connects it all together. You're learning about fiqh, and it's an Aqidah class. You're learning about grammar, it's an Aqidah class. Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, tasfiyah wa tarbiyah. Right? These fundamental ideals and concepts, removing away the filth and educating the people, raising them correctly. This is Aqidah, this is Minhaj. Shaykh Muqbil, rahimahullah ta'ala. Don't you see the effort that was established by him in Damaj and how he changed the perception of Yemen in the eyes of so many, to where Yemen went from being a place where there was tashayyur and Shi'ism in abundance to where Yemen became one of the centers again of knowledge, where people travel from all over the world to go learn and study with him. And it used to be a praise just to say, I met Sheikh Muqbil, or I studied in Damaj. And so these things that made these people stand out wasn't just their knowledge. People are imams in hadith, no problem. But it's the quality when a person is an imam in hadith, an imam in fiqh, an imam in lugha, and also an imam in the sunnah. And that's why these people stood out. And so you find all throughout history, there's this constant grouping together of, well, there were four people. Imam Ahmed, Yahya bin Ma'in, Ali bin al-Madini, Abu Bakr bin Abi Shayba. There were four people, right? Abdul Rahman, Yahya bin Sa'id, right? There were four people. There were three people all the time like this. Al-Khulafa Rashidun, all the time like this. There's this grouping. And so Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, he's saying that the imams in our time were four. Sufyan al-Thawri was in Kufa. He was the guy in Kufa. If you're going to Kufa, that's who you're going to. And Malik in Hijaz. If you're in Central Arabia, Malik. That's it. He is the pinnacle. And if you are in Sham, al-Awza'i. Right? If you were in the Levant, then without a doubt, it was al-Awza'i was the imam of that area. And if you were in Basra, then Hamad ibn Zayd. And so these four individuals are names you have to know and be familiar with, because Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, the imam of people, of Jarh and Ta'dil, of his time, he's telling you that these four people were the imams of their time. You know, we'll take a couple more. We still have so much to go in this chapter. So I don't know, and I apologize. I get off topic and long-winded. We'll take a couple more. He says, حدثنا آسف. وجدت في كتابي أن الحسن بن علي بن محمد بن الفضل قال أنبأنا محمد بن عمرو قال حدثنا الحسن بن ثواب التغلبي قال حدثنا أبو بكر بن أبي الأسود قال عبد الرحمن بن مهدي لم أرى أعرف بالسنة وما يدخل فيها من حماد بن زيد ولم أرى أحدا وصف لها من شهاب ولم أرى أحدا أوصف لها من شهاب بن خراش وكان سفيان ينصت له إذا تكلم ولم أرى أحدا كان أبلغ من ابن المبارك. Just more examples of this. He says that I found in my book. So here's his honesty. He's narrating a narration that he found in his book, but it's as if he doesn't remember putting it there, or it's something that he's not as certain about from the information that he is transmitting. So instead of saying that so-and-so told us, he says, I found in my book. Right? Because, oh man, did I hear this from the sheikh? man, I know I wrote it down, but did I hear from him? Did I hear from somebody else? SubhanAllah, I can't remember. I found in my book. And so this is a narration. This is a type of honesty in narrating, where he wouldn't just claim it when it wasn't something that he was 100% confident about how he received it. He said, I found in my book, on the authority of Al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn al-Fadl. He said that Muhammad ibn Amr informed us. He said that Al-Hasan ibn Thawab al-Taghlibi informed us. He said that Abu Bakr ibn al-Aswad narrated to us. He said that Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi. He said, I've never seen anybody more knowledgeable about the Sunnah, i.e. the Aqidah, and what should be included in it, or what it is, than Hamad ibn Zayd. I've never seen anybody more knowledgeable about the Sunnah and what it is than Hamad ibn Zayd. And I've never seen anybody more described with it than Shihab ibn Khirash. Meaning, yeah, Hamad ibn Zayd was the most knowledgeable about what it is and what its details are. But I've never seen somebody embody it more. Somebody who, when they talked about how he carried himself, they talked about it more of it being on the Sunnah than Shihab ibn Khirash. He's the one who exemplified it the best. And he said, and Sufyan, whenever he would talk, Sufyan al-Thawri, whenever he would talk, people would hush up and pay attention. Right? Whenever Sufyan al-Thawri would talk, people would hush up and pay attention. And he says, and I've never seen anybody more ablagh than Ibn al-Mubarak. This statement ablagh here, there's a lot of different ways to translate it, so I'm not sure which way to translate it. More eloquent, more extensive in his approach to the Sunnah, right? More detailed, more advanced, more effort putting, right? More far-reaching in his effect. Right? All of these things could be possible ways to translate it. Ablagh. No, it could be eloquent, but I don't know if that's the best. It could be more, ablagh, more extensive in how he handled the Sunnah and dealt with it in Aqidah. More far-reaching, like Ibn al-Mubarak had a great effect, right? His people loved Ibn al-Mubarak. Like if you're thinking like how like Bin Baz or rahimahullah ta'ala, how all the people agreed upon him, right? And you can't find too many people with bad things to say about him. And this is similar to how Ibn al-Mubarak was, right? Every group of people claims Ibn al-Mubarak. He's somebody that all of them, he was far-reaching in his effect, in his acceptance of people, or the way that people accepted him. Perhaps one of these things is the meaning. I don't know how to translate that statement because there's no context to say what he actually means when he says he was more effective. I never met anybody more effective than Ibn al-Mubarak. Now, he says, so these are just individuals that he's talking about their quality again, individuals that it's important for us to know. And like we said, the connection could always be, once again, that how do you get this status to where the people of testimony and the witnesses of Allah acknowledge and confirm your validity? Then it's through your preserving, reviving, and calling to the Sunnah. 2 more or 3 more. He says, أخبرنا علي قال أنبأنا عبد الرحمن قال أخبرني أبي قال حدثنا أحمد بن إبراهيم الدورقي. Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi, if you were with us in Tahdhib al-Tahdhib, right? That's one of the first people we learned about, the only Ahmed ibn Ibrahim in Bukhari. He's in Dawood and other books as well, right? Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi, he was an imam, fiqh. He says that, when did he die? Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi, is it 236 or 242? I don't remember off the top of my head. We got to go back to that lecture and remind ourselves, right? Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi, he said that Al-Qasim ibn Salam narrated to me. He said that Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi informed us. Or informed me, I'm sorry. Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi informed me. He said that ما كان بالشام أحد أعلم بالسنة من الأوزاعي. Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, he said there was nobody in Sham, i.e. the Levant, who was more knowledgeable than al-Awza'i. There was nobody in Sham who was more knowledgeable than al-Awza'i. I'm impatient. I can't wait to go back to it till later. I need to know now. Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi. Ahmed ibn Ibrahim ibn Kathir ibn Zayd al-Dawraqi. أخرج له الأربعة. But it also should be Bukhari. ثقة بغدادي حافظ من العاشر مات سنة 46. I got the numbers confused on both fronts. Not 36, not 42, but 46. Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi. It says al-Arba'a. Why do they keep saying al-Arba'a? It should be Bukhari if I wasn't mistaken. Ahmed ibn Ibrahim ibn Kathir ibn Zayd. روى عنه. Muslim, not Bukhari. Muslim, not Bukhari. Muslim wa Abu Dawood wa Ibn Majah. No, Muslim wa Abu Dawood wa Tirmidhi wa Ibn Majah. That's who we mentioned. Muslim wa Abu Dawood wa Tirmidhi wa Ibn Majah. Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi, he died 246. Now, so he says that Abdurrahman, Ali informed us. He said that Abdurrahman informed us. He said that my father informed me. He said that Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Dawraqi informed or narrated to us. He said that Al-Qasim ibn Salam, or Abu Ubaid Al-Qasim ibn Salam, he narrated to me. He said that Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi informed me. He said that there was nobody in Sham who was more knowledgeable about the Sunnah than Al-Awza'i. There was nobody in Sham who was more knowledgeable about the Sunnah than Al-Awza'i. Right? We talked about Amr ibn Abdurrahman Al-Awza'i. Let's just confirm. Right? I hate to say something and then have a slip of the tongue. But Amr ibn Abdurrahman Al-Awza'i. And I'm glad I did, because is it Amr ibn Abdurrahman or Abdurrahman ibn Amr? And that's why I did it. Abdurrahman ibn Amr. Abdurrahman. Let's just go this way. Al-Awza'i. Al-Awza'i. Abdurrahman ibn Amr. Yeah, I had him transposed. Abdurrahman ibn Amr al-Awza'i, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was the Imam of the people of Sham, and he actually used to have a madhab that was prominent in North Africa before the madhab of Imam Malik really took off there. Because the people in the Levant, they're the ones who conquered the Northern African area. And so his madhab was one that was dominant because there was nobody in Sham more knowledgeable about the Sunnah than Al-Awza'i. And then after people started coming from Al-Andalus and the far west in Africa to learn from Imam Malik, and after the students of Imam Malik made their way to Egypt and things like that, you found that the method of Imam Malik started to spread, especially in Northern Africa. But before that, the madhab there was the madhab of Al-Awza'i. And so he said there was nobody more knowledgeable about the Sunnah in Ash-Sham than Al-Awza'i, Abdurrahman ibn Amr. He says, and these are the last two narrations, he says, أنبأنا أحمد بن محمد بن حفص الحروي قال حدثنا عبد الله بن عدي قال حدثني محمد بن مطهر قال حدثني ابن المصفى قال سمعت بقية يقول سمعت الأوزاعي يقول ندور مع السنة حيثما دارت. Like as we said, he's mentioning these people to set us up for statements of theirs. And these statements, يكتب بماء الذهب. They should be written with golden ink. Like ink made out of melted gold, how valuable they are. He says that Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Hafs al-Harawi, he informed us. He said that Abdullah ibn Adi narrated to us. He said that Muhammad ibn Mutahhir narrated to me. He said that Ibn Musaffa narrated to me. He said that I heard Baqiyya. He said that I heard Al-Awza'i, who said, we revolve around the Sunnah wherever it goes, right? We go where the Sunnah goes. Naduru ma'a sunnati haythu ma darat. Our orbit, right, is around the center of the Sunnah. We orbit around the Sunnah wherever it ends up. If the Sunnah is going over here, you're going to find us over here. Because our orbit, naduru, our revolution, our rotation, we rotate with the sunnah, as the way we sang in slang, like how we rotate with something. We rotate with the sunnah. Our orbit is with the sunnah wherever it ends up at. And this is the way it should be. This is the fundamental, right? Put the aqidah, put the minhaj, put the sunnah first. And when you find what the sunnah says about something, فَحَسْبُكَ بِهِ, then that's enough for you. نَدُورُ مَعَ السُنَّةِ حَيْثُمَا دَارَتْ. The last narration we'll talk about, he says, أخبرنا أحمد بن عبيد قال أنبأنا محمد بن الحسين قال حدثنا أحمد بن أبي خيثمة قال حدثنا صبيح بن عبد الله الفرغاني قال حدثنا أبو إسحاق الفزاري أن الأوزاعي قال كان يقال 5 كان عليها أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والتابعون بإحسان لزوم الجماعة واتباع السنة وعمارة المساجد وتلاوة القرآن والجهاد في سبيل الله. Right? When we talk about these fundamentals, here you have a statement from Al-Awza'i articulating it to the T. And look at the names in the chain. You see other individuals that he mentioned. He says that Ahmed ibn Ubaid informed us. He said that Muhammad ibn Hussein informed us. He said that Ahmed ibn Abi Khaythama narrated to us. Yani Ahmed ibn Zuhair ibn Harb, Abi Khaythama. Ahmed ibn Abi Khaythama. He said that Subayh ibn Abdullah al-Farghani narrated to us. He said that I heard Abu Ishaq al-Fazari. Abu Ishaq al-Fazari was from those people we said where? The people in Kufa. Sah wala la? Abu Ishaq al-Fazari. Now I want to say Basra now. Abu Ishaq al-Fazari. Yes, the people of Sham. Duh. He's narrating on Abdurrahman ibn Amr al-Awza'i. Abu Ishaq al-Fazari. Abu Ishaq al-Fazari, he said that on the authority of al-Awza'i, he said that it used to be said, yani al-Awza'i, this is his statement, he said it used to be said that the companions of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the tabi'un, who followed them in goodness, used to have 5 things that they were upon. The thing that they were upon, their fundamentals were 5 things. So if you're looking and somebody asks you, what does it mean to be Salafi? What is the Salafi da'wah? What is Salafiyah? Right? Abdurrahman ibn Amr ibn Auf, Abdurrahman ibn Amr al-Awza'i, he's telling you the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, they used to be upon 5 things. Write these things down. Luzum al-Jama'ah, sticking with the main body of the Muslims. This is physically as it relates to the leaders and hearing and obeying and not doing khuruj. So going outside and revolting is not something the Sahaba and the Tabi'un were upon. And it also means non-physically, i.e. sticking with the body of the Muslims in belief and in ideology, not deviating away from the fundamentals that those who were before them were upon. And then he says, ittiba'u sunnah. The second fundamental was following the sunnah. And following the sunnah here means following the way of the Prophet ﷺ in general in affairs of belief as well as worship. So they didn't deviate in how they believed or in what they worshipped or how they worshipped. And so this is following the sunnah, right? This is from their fundamentals. Wa imaratul masajid. Establishing the masajid physically, meaning they wouldn't go to an area except their primary goal in that new area that they were in, establish a masjid. The Prophet, when he got to Medina before building his houses, established a masjid. The Sahaba, when they opened up a different city here or there, the first thing, establish a masjid. So physically building the masajid, and likewise spiritually building the masajid by visiting them and going to them and establishing them with salat and dhikr and halaqat of ilm. And like this was the fundamental of Salafiyah, establishing the masjid. So all of us, and wallahi, this is from the aib, from the things that are criticized about the Salafi, is that why are our masajid so often the poor in the back apartment building that you can only fit 15 brothers in? La ya ikhwan. Establish the man. We're not talking about the decoration that the deviants do but give it the space. Let it be the place that the people want to come to learn. The mashayikh show up and you can accommodate, right? Because this is what they would do. They would establish all of these masajid that are established in these different countries in the world, in Egypt, in Qayrawan, and all of these countries in the East or the West. And all of these are things that were established by Sahaba and Tabi'een because they knew the importance of establishing the masjid, not just with brick and mortar, but with the worship that is done therein. And these are the things that will make the masjid continue even after your death. For our brothers and sisters who establish these small masajid, and may Allah reward them with good for their efforts. But for the people who go there and who, we're Salafi this, but our homes are nice and our masajid are poor, right? Let's put some effort into building up the Salafi masajid. So that way, when the people come and they want to know what is the Islam, and the common people come, they're not distracted by the decoration and the adornments of the masajid of the Ikhwan or the masajid of the Tabligh, but they see the Salafi masjid and they say, man, okay, let's go pray here. It's comfortable here. The people there, mashallah, I love to hear them talk about salat on time and zakat and aqidah. And we start to go to these masajid and they stay, so that when the brother who had all the bills in his name, when he dies, the masjid maintains and it becomes the center for generations to come, right? Because this was the usul of the people of the Sunnah, as was said by Abdul Rahman al-Awza'i, imaratul masajid, building them and maintaining them. He says, وَتِلَاوَةُ الْقُرْآنِ, subhanallah, and reciting the Quran. الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابِ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ أُولَٰئِكَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِهِ. Those who we gave them the book, they recite it the way it deserves to be recited. It is them who have iman in it. We claim iman, we claim love for Allah, for the messenger, we claim salafiyah. But what is our relationship with the Quran? Do we read it? Do we have a wird, a daily portion that we are dedicated to, that we're constant with? Do we understand it? Right? It's not just reading it, it's the tilawah, understanding it. Do we act upon it? Tilawatul Quran yashmal tilawatul qira'ah wa tilawatul al-ittiba'. The reciting of it and the following of it, right? Do we do these things? Do we seek remedy with the Quran? Or have we abandoned the Quran? وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ يَا رَبِّ إِنَّ قَوْمٍ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا. Right? Are we the people of the Quran or not? Because if we are Salafi, then this is Abdul Rahman al-Awza'i telling us that the Salaf from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, they were on 5 things. They were on luzum al-jama'ah, not causing mischief and fitna and separating the people, but staying together, and staying together physically and religious, scholastically. And they would follow the Sunnah, and they would establish the masajid, and they would recite and adhere to the Quran. And then the last thing, al-jihadu fi sabilillah. They would do jihad in the path of Allah. And maybe somebody says, Abdul Hakim, what do you mean? Nowadays that we don't have jihad. We're in America. We're not doing jihad with the sword, nor am I calling to that. Because from jihad, and the jihad that they would establish first would be the jihad with the pen and the jihad with the tongue. And that jihad requires knowledge. And wallahi, if you establish the jihad with these 2 things, you'll find the need for the jihad with the sword reduced. And yes, jihad with the sword is part of Islam, with its conditions and its prerequisites from a leader and a body. And there's no getting around that. There's no whitewashing that or removing that from the religion. Offensive and defensive jihad are from Islam. But at the same point in time, while you find some of those people who try to make you think that they are upon Salafiyah by calling for the takfir of the Muslims in general and going against the Muslim rulers and revolting with the claim that they want to establish the jihad that the Salaf were upon, we say, why don't we establish the jihad that led to so much victory? The jihad of knowledge, the jihad with the pen, with the tongue, writings and correspondences, right? This is from the jihad, and this is the greater of the 2 jihads. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. هذا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. وعليكم السلام ورحمه الله واياكم. حبك نعم. we can get that status by simplifying and carrying ourselves the way they did in preserving the Sunnah through our character. For sure. For sure. Preserving the Sunnah, reviving the Sunnah, preserving the Sunnah, learning it, reviving the Sunnah, acting upon it, and telling people about it when they've abandoned it. And calling to the Sunnah is obviously that, inviting people to implement the Sunnah. We go wherever the Sunnah is at any time and place. Now, naduru ma Sunnah, haythu ma darat. So the question is, do we take from a person that's upon the Sunnah, but he is unknown or heard of, but he is upon the Quran and the Sunnah? So there's two things about this. Do we take from a person who's on the Quran and Sunnah, but he's unknown of and unheard of? That is almost an impossibility. Because for a person to be upon the Quran and the Sunnah, then they had to have been taught the Quran and the Sunnah. And this is one of the things that is important about our religion, is that isnad. And that's what we talked about earlier on. You know a person by their relationships. So a person who is in a city, who is in a community, who is upon the Quran and the Sunnah, who is he with? Who are his teachers? What masjid did he grow up in? What people knew about him? Somebody should know about him. If a person just pops up out of nowhere, and even if they're talking to the Quran and talking about the Sunnah, but nobody knows about them, they're an unknown figure, then this will cause us pause. And this is something they used to do even in the time of the Salaf. An unknown person who didn't have students, if he didn't have 2 students, majhul al-hal. Right? I'm sorry, majhul al-ain. He doesn't have 2 students. You got to at least have 2 students. You're going to be on a Sunnah. Why nobody listening to you? And if he had 2 students, but nobody talked good about him ever, nobody ever spoke good of him, nobody ever praised him and acknowledged something that he was upon, he could be a good guy, but we don't know who he is. And so these are principles that they used to adhere to. So a person who is completely unknown, I would say it's almost an impossibility that a person who is completely unknown be somebody who was calling to the Quran and the Sunnah. How did he get to this position? How did he get to this status? Now, he might be unknown to you. You might not know who he is, or you might have never heard of him before. And this is why we talk about, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah by those relationships, right? Who is he praising? Who is he bigging up? Who are the scholars that he's referring to and calling you to? What is the information that he's given? And like this, your family, even if it's a distant cousin who you didn't even know existed, when he starts talking about his family members and his relationships and those people that he descends from. Additionally, when they talk about how do you recognize a scholar, right? They talk about a scholar is recognized through 3 circumstances, or through 3 methods. The scholar is famous and doesn't need anybody to attest for him, right? His fame has preceded him to the extent that nobody asks about him. Salih al-Fawzan, hafidhahullah ta'ala. You don't got to ask anybody about Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, right? You might know of some sheikh who said good about Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan. You might know the specific praise that they mentioned, but Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, we don't even got to ask. Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, you don't even got to ask. Their fame precedes them. And so this is one way you know a scholar. Another way you know a scholar is by the statements of other scholars regarding him. And so you look and see what the scholars of his time, or if it's somebody who's passed away, the scholars after him, and even the scholars before him, his teachers, what they said about him. And so when you have this body of people praising him and supporting him, then you can know that this person is somebody of value. And this is what they usually refer to nowadays when they call it tazkiyah, who man zakka, who praised him, who spoke good about him, who authorized him, who allowed him. And when we talk about this allowance, there's a general tazkiyah, there's ijazah, which is a less of a thing. And then there's no general tazkiyah, right? There's a person who's a good person, a good brother, benefit from him, right? But it doesn't elevate him to the status of sheikh or alim, right? From our mashayikh, alhamdulillah, there's mashayikh who speak good of us. It doesn't change the reality of who we are. We're not a sheikh, we're not an alim. We're just a simple brother trying to learn the religion. And so like this, you have to understand the difference between like general good statements about a person and the difference between that and when somebody is, okay, no, this is a person, he has ijazah in fatwa, for example, or he has a tazkiyah from Sheikh so-and-so, in a specific sense. So you have this tazkiyah, what the scholars say about a person, and everybody should do what they can do, right? If you have knowledge about something and you're confident in your knowledge about that thing and you know what you're talking about and you've learned it from the sheikh and you have information and you studied, you can convey that information. You don't have to have a detailed tazkiyah saying you so-and-so are authorized to say and teach thalathat al-usul. If you studied thalathat al-usul and understood thalathat al-usul and comprehend thalathat al-usul, then teach thalathat al-usul in your masjid. Right? Because this knowledge, it's not something that there's a flip of a switch and it comes the next day. You might start off in your masjid and there's nobody listening. There's one or two brothers you're just getting together and you learn from that experience and you come across a portion of the book that you don't understand. Maybe you missed class that day. You don't try to feign the knowledge. You don't try to act like you know so you protect your rep. You say, I don't understand this. I don't get it. Let's take it back to the mashayikh. Let's ask. And that's the reality. Mashayikh ask mashayikh, right? Scholars ask scholars. They don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. So there's the general tazkiyah that this person is, from what I know about them, is upon goodness, is upon soundness. They understand their value, their position, their level. They know what they're capable of, what they're not capable of. And so you can benefit them to the limits that are being mentioned in this regard. And then you have general, specific tazkiyat that are more greater in size, where this person is an alim. This person is a scholar. When a scholar says about another scholar, al-alim, al-allam, al-faqih, al-mujtahid, something like this. The third way you know, we're an hour and 11 minutes. We got to stop. The third way you know that a person is a scholar is because his works speak for themselves. How many people have died throughout history where we don't know a lot about them, like Al-Lalaka'i, for example. But we know that they're a scholar because their work speaks for themselves. So, like we said, do we take from a person who is on the Quran and the Sunnah, but he is unknown or unheard of, but he's calling to the Quran and the Sunnah? If he's on the Quran and the Sunnah and calling to it, there has to be somebody who knows of him and somebody who's heard of him. If not, I would be cautious about that individual. Somebody should know about him. But it doesn't necessitate that everybody knows about him. And like this, we look for those who do know about him to ask about that person and his quality. They love to go to the masjid because it was of what it was built upon. Yes, what do you mean by staying together scholastically? Meaning they stay together in their minhaj, in their knowledge, not their physical bodies, but they're together based on the information that gathers them. Right? I am with the Sahaba, even though they've died and moved on, because the information that they were upon gathers me with them. That's why we're called Sunnah, والجماعة, right? We're with a group, the physical group, the body of the Muslims, but we're also with the Sahaba. You find me with the Sahaba, right? Scholastically. Naduru ma Sunnah, haythu ma darat. He said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Do you call the iqamah for the Sunnah prayers? Not that I know of. I've never heard of anybody calling the iqamah for the Sunnah prayers, but if he is upon the Sunnah, even if he is by himself, he is upon the truth, even if he's by himself. It may be said that it benefit from him so that he is like a teacher, ustad, for lack of better words. I don't understand. Anyway, subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.